Hi, everyone. This is Belle with Pop Culture Uncovered, and I'm here with Armand that,
Mm.
and Pete. And
Hey,
I can tell by the level of enthusiasm that you guys have some thoughts. So, we're going to
hey,
talk about this James Bond news right quick. So, as you can see on the screen, James Bond, the creative controller of James Bond, will now be officially fully in Amazon MGM Studios hands and out of the hands of Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. Uh, I don't feel any type of way about this other than
Oh, I do.
I know you do. I know you do.
Feel,
Because
mm, mm.
me personally, I like Bond well enough. It's not a go-to franchise for me. I very much enjoyed the Daniel Craig era, like a great deal more than I did any of the previous eras. Um, I have often felt that the Bond films are, when they're good, they're very good, and that every Bond, to an extent, was good at being the character, but the scripts did not always serve them. And so for me personally, they especially the what's our guy, the Sean Connery Bond doesn't age well for obvious reasons. So I I don't really have any deep thoughts about it. I just kind of want to wait and see what they do. I do have some thoughts on how I think they can go forward with casting, but I'm going to let Pete and Armand go first. Armand?
Well, I would say, so you're telling me that a fascistic organization that's dedicated to obtaining as much monetary wealth and control over the U.S. and global economy as possible is now responsible for piloting the ship of the greatest imperialist agent of the 20th century? I'm just like, I don't know why Amazon decided to buy this, but I could have told them like y'all can save y'all money because you know y'all having a hard enough time making Jack Ryan work. So I don't know why y'all are like, oh, we're gonna sign up for Bond because I'm like, there's no way Daniel Craig played that character exceedingly well. Having acknowledged that time period in which Daniel Craig played Bond was the last believable time that anybody with two frontal lobes that are intact could view that character in a 100% positive light. Because if you have read anything or seen anything, between the American and the British, those intelligence services had one moment when they were doing something positive, and that's when they were killing Nazis. Every other moment besides that moment, they were jacking up brown people. Now, if you gonna give me a Bond that's like, oh, I'm gonna go run through Ghana. I'm gonna kill Kwame Nkrumah. Okay, I can believe that. You gonna give me a Bond that's working. To get Fred Hampton killed. You can believe that. If you gonna give me a Bond to save the damn world, I'm gonna be like, look, somebody shoot him. I'm like, look, somebody sign me up for Spectre, because I will damn sure go work for Blofeld. So, and I say this as I own every Bond film when I was young and I wasn't politically, as politically aware. I bought into all the crap. I love the gadgets. I love the lore. I know all the stuff. I've read some of the Ian Fleming's novels. Like, yeah, I'm a Bond dude. Like, I took my kids to the Spy Museum. We went through the Bond car exhibit, all that. And I'm still like hot trash garbage. I would have an easier time updating Flash Gordon for the modern era, even though he would be a Chad to the nth degree. As a matter of fact, take that back. I can make Tarzan work, and I can't do nothing with Bond. And Tarzan is literally the idea that after thousands of years of Africans walking around in Africa, nobody figured out how to talk to animals except for this orphan white boy. So if I can make Tarzan work, and I'm telling you that there is no practical way to make Bond work, I'm like, yo, man, y'all better just send him at the drug cartels. Like, seriously, if you're gonna do Bond, the only conceivable way I think you could do it, take a good look at Benicio, what Benicio del Toro did with Sicario. And if you want to take it there and have it like between a cross between that and the Man on Fire, then I'm like, that's a modern lane for Bond. Now, I don't know how the gadgets and the rest of the stuff work, and the Bond girl stuff, that ain't gonna fly neither. But you know, so I guess what I'm saying is I'm wishing Amazon good luck, but in my
Th-
heart, I don't wish Amazon luck with anything. So I sit back with resigned apathy while I contemplate whether I can assist, either Blofeld or perhaps Goldfinger in bringing about the final demise of Mr. Bond.
Well,
Woo, I love it. So I spent today looking at the news, and then I jumped on Reddit just to see what that reaction would be, and it did not disappoint. At least it did not disappoint in insofar as like the worst people have the worst takes. First, everyone was clutching their pearls in a very different way with Amazon. In like, oh, I guess we're gonna get, Jane Bond. Well, only if she's like black, only if she's in a wheelchair, only if she's trans. Like, they are just pooping themselves with like rage and speculation and pearl clutching. And like, one dude was just like, they ruined Star Wars and they ruined Star Trek and they ruined Indiana Jones and they ruined Lord of the Rings. And and it's not one person. It was like 400 people with that exact quote. With that, they've got their same one joke. And I'm like, man, this is so boring. This is such a boring take. At least Armand, like, I feel like your point is something that I just keep thinking about, which is, I in we've talked about this years ago, how Jason Bourne, despite the fact that the movies definitely deviated from the books, but the tone that they matched of like this book of like this is a government organization that has super spies, and it has, I think, one of the most realistic takes, right, is that these super spies are broken. They are broken, dangerous people, even Bourne himself. And we've said this again a number of times, but without the Bourne movies, there's no one knew what to do with James Bond. After Die Another Day, it had reached a level of ridiculousness that it was never going to be able to come back from. And I still liked it. I liked Pierce Brosnan. I was sad to see him become a Bond 10 years after he should have been, but then we wouldn't have gotten Timothy Dalton. And so I have all these, like, I have a lot of fun memories about James Bond, a lot of fondness for James Bond, but it really boils down to the gadgets and that sort of like suave, cool spy thing that is so played out. You can't do it anymore. It's been done so much, and then it's been lampooned so much that like you can't even do a comedy movie where the spy is, this, tuxedo wearing, you know, uh, master of combat, master of gadgets, and master of luck, and slick with the ladies. Like, it just, look, we've had like 60 years of it. There's nowhere else to go. We've been out of space, and at least Jason Bourne movies, kind of provided a level of like grittiness and inspiration to literally just Xerox and say, well, this is how we're doing James Bond now. And Daniel Craig was the perfect person to do it. But it was still on its last legs. It was still a franchise that was like, we are out of ideas, but we're just gonna kind of keep trying. I mean, by the time it all wrapped, the Daniel Craig Bond was almost as, maybe not silly, but at least as out there, as the last few Pierce Brosnan movies. I don't know what you do with James Bond except do the things that everyone is clutching their pearls over, and I don't even want to see that. It's not that I don't want to see, a female 007 or black 007 or a Latino 007, but I do think at this point you're not even in the lore anymore, and I would just rather see an original work of art. Like, and to be honest, James Bond had like an amazing run as a character, but we we can do new stuff. Um, we've there's something like 30 something movies. We can do new stuff. And so I don't know what Amazon's big plan is, but whether whether you're living in reality or living by the red pill, I feel like none of us is excited for what's to come when it comes to James Bond.
Well, that
But
actually
maybe I'm
leads
wrong.
perfectly into my thoughts on how would we make it work. And for me, I think that they would have to either go the agency route, which I don't know if you guys are familiar. The agency stars Jodie Turner Smith and young Magneto, Lord of Mercy, Michael Fassbender, and it is about a agent who has been in this world for so long and to the point where he has almost kind of forgotten who he is. And Jodie Turner Smith's character is like the only thing that he has grounding him in who he was before he became an agent. And he falls in love with her, and unfortunately, that pulls her right into this mess. Or the Day of the Jackal route, which is another new series, and that one stars Lashana Lynch, who should have been James Bond. That was the perfect opportunity they had in the last film to pass it over to her, and they chose not to. Um, as an agent who's trying to catch basically James Bond, she's spending her time trying to catch the guy who is the world's top assassin. And so I think the only way to modernize it is, to your point, Armand, either have him taking down, um, have him taking down drug cartels, have him taking down white supremacist groups, have him doing that. Or you can't, because this is in this day and age, the Ian Fleming version of Bond comes across as extremely cheesy and boring, to be honest. There's a reason that I didn't lock in the Bond until they got to Daniel Craig, where he was a much more modern character and I understood him a lot more. And the last movie pissed me off so much because it wasn't good and it was not, to me, was not a good send off for that character. Um, and so I don't know how you go forward, but I think that I do. I'm surprising myself by saying this, but I do think that they can. Armand?
All right. So if you had to modernize him, which Amazon does because they spent like a couple $1 billion to get him, what I would say is this: take a good look at GoldenEye. GoldenEye worked because GoldenEye acknowledged, Bond's not only Bond's personal failings, but the failings of the British government. The whole
Hmm.
premise was that Alex Trevelyan's people had been betrayed by British intelligence. So therefore, it was literally the sins of the past revisiting themselves. So I put it like this: you want to challenge Bond? Give Bond a Killmonger-like villain.
Hmm.
His actions are 100% justified, but they're in opposition to what MI5 and the British government want. And how does Bond respond to that? Like you cannot romanticize what Bond was. And the reason why you can't is because you're going to get 35% of the original audience, right? A lot of people aren't going to show because it's not Connery and it's not, it is not Craig. The other half, if you give the red pill guys exactly what they're looking for, that's not a mass marketable movie. What you
Right.
can, and look, and I'm just gonna be 100% honest. Bond is a white guy. I think Bond being a white guy is just a thing. I think, if you want to switch up the race of the character, I take an example like Atomic Blonde with Charlize Theron. That was a phenomenal movie that could have just as easily have been a Bond movie, but it was a female character and it was written for a female character and it worked. So if you got to modernize Bond, you have to lean into the current moment and put the character in that moment. Which I feel like they played a little bit with the Daniel Craig stuff. And just in terms of bringing in lots of shades of morally gray and so on and so forth. So now that I'm kind of done my earlier soapbox diatribe, there are conceivable ways to make the character work. I will say it's going to take what Bond movies typically don't always have, which is exceptional writing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of all the Bond movies in the back half of the 20th century, I consistently say GoldenEye is probably the best executed Bond movie out of all of them because it manages to be just silly enough that he's driving a tank around St. Petersburg and you're like kind of like believe in the moment. But it's real enough that when he drops Alex Trevelyan off the satellite dish, you're like, for England, James, and everybody's like, nah, it's for me, dog. I'm dropping you, dropping you right now for me. So that's my piece.
Pete, what about you? How would you modernize it?
I mean, I think there's a couple there's a couple things I thought of. One is to put it in the past. I mean, one of the only ways that Bond works in the first place is in his own era. Like, and I'm just thinking of some of the movies that I saw, which, grew up liking the Sean Connery movies more, but, the Roger Moore movies were the most recent to me until Dalton shows up. And then those, he was, fighting drug cartels and things. But even that just didn't feel as Bond, even as a kid. And I couldn't put my finger on it because you have, Judi Dench's M says in Goldeneye, uh, that he's a relic, he's a dinosaur. So you kind of have to put him in his in his element in the past. I mean, I'm wondering, I'm looking at the Fantastic Four movie that's coming out, and how a lot of people were talking about how the best way to do Daredevil was like maybe 10 years ago of like let's just put him in the 70s. Let's just put James Bond in the only way to romanticize who James Bond is to maybe just put him in that era, because even by the 90s we had like this was played out, and now we're living in like this bizarre post-truth, you know uh, absolutely bonkers era where I don't believe that anymore. I don't believe in like the super spy, like this. Our villains are much more sinister and much more stupid, and they're much more like in your face. I can't believe in a Blofeld. I can't believe in in Scaramanga. I can't believe in the entirety of Moonraker when when what's happening now, like I don't believe in these spies anymore. I mean, we barely, but they were cartoons. They were cartoonish when we were growing up. They were silly and escapist and grounded in no sense of reality when it comes to spies and everything when we were kids, before we were even kids. But even now, it's just much more ridiculous because I'm just too cynical. I feel like most of us are just too cynical to go and watch some new, 35-year-old put on a tuxedo and be dashing, and win the day for God and country. I couldn't care less now, and I believe it even less now. And so you either just have to make it a full-on cartoon, give it to Robert Rodriguez, give him like $3 million and just and someone with no name, and just let him go. And it'll be great, made for it'll be great streaming. It'll never hit the theaters. But or you set him in the distant past when you could still sort of romanticize this idea. You can take away certain types of technology so that the gadgets that you give him can seem, both old and new. Have some fun playing in that era, because to me that's the only option you've got. Because when you bring him into the present time, there's nothing for James Bond to do that I'll believe, and there's nothing that James Bond will do that I will root for anymore.
Well, that goes to my final thoughts, which are on casting. As I said in our group chat, the only way that Bond works for me going forward is you have to cast somebody who actually, now, one of the things that really worked with Daniel Craig is, in all honesty, if it wasn't for his massive charisma, you wouldn't look at Daniel Craig twice on the street. He's an ordinary looking guy. He's extremely charismatic. And when he's on screen, he's dynamic. But in person, You wouldn't notice him. You really wouldn't. And so for casting, you either need to go with someone who isn't supposed to be, you know, a supermodel like Craig, or you go with someone who's black or brown. And to me, that means you go with either a Rege-Jean Page or a Dev Patel. You go with someone, and the reason I think that that could work specifically is for a spy who gets looked past. A spy is supposed to be able to get in and out of places because they aren't going to be noticed. People don't notice black and brown people. Logically, that would work. From a purely logical position, that would work. Yeah, both of those actors can definitely do the three-piece suit, charming, suave thing. But if you want to sell me a super spy, then you want to sell me somebody who I truly can believe can just walk into a place dressed as the janitor and walk out with all of your state secrets while also having them hands, which both of those actors do. But that goes to modernization. Now, if we want to do what you're saying, Pete, which is just put him back in his era, then you could just have any random white British guy who's got some charisma and can fight. And I think either would work. I just don't know if either would pull me personally, if the latter would make me want to come watch. What about you guys?
The central issue to me is what is Bond going to do in the story? What because putting a brown face on imperialism doesn't change anything. So unless you're going to do that, and this the juxtaposition of I'm serving the empire, but I'm hurting the people that I come from, and how do I deal with that? Like there's an intellectual complexity that's like no like there are no easy fixes. There is no we'll just make him a woman. Okay, well that's going to trigger an entirely different thought process. Although I will say this, I do think a woman, if I combine a woman and putting it in the past, then you get Ed Brubaker's Velvet, which was literally what happens if Miss Moneypenny actually had been Bond, and this was like her retirement job, and her spouse gets killed, and she goes back in and discovers this massive conspiracy, and only the leadership understand how dangerous her ass is because they're like, oh. She was Bond for like 20 years, and then we gave her this desk job for retirement. Now, if you want to do that, I would tell you that that would absolutely work on a couple thousand different levels. I don't know
That's
how you build multiple
amazing.
sequels off that,
Right.
but
But that's something I would do instead of Bond. Like that's at that point, it's like, well, why restrict ourselves? To me, changing, and I know that it aligns with some terrible people and their comments about James Bond. But there is something about this character, as sort of this, imperialist and enforcer of imperialism, um, where, if we're going to change the if we're going to change his race, we're going to change gender, we're going to do any of those things. I'm like, well, let's just go the whole way. Why does it have to be James Bond? At that point, why make it James Bond at all? Which I know aligns with a lot of people's arguments, but at the same time, it's like, well, it's hard to make James Bond to me is just 100% nostalgia at this point. And like, I don't know that I want to go in. And so to me, if like we're going to, have some new faces. We're going to have, a new presence when it comes to, a James Bond character. The ones that you've already mentioned, Belle, to me are 100 times more interesting than whatever they're going to roll out with James Bond. And I could be wrong. They could do something, but like Armand, like you said, it's got to be about the writing. It's got to be like, I want to see this person in danger. I want to see this person struggle with their morality. I want to see this person struggle with who they work for and why and the things that they encounter, and like, at least have some semblance of a conversation that's happening in the show. Because if we're just going to retread, it just seems silly. And the fact is, even James Bond stopped retreading. The Daniel Craig era, was very much aware of what had come before, and I think that's one of the only reasons it worked, uh, was because it had that awareness. And so to me, it's uh, look, I'm all for you for franchises that have been around forever, Trek, Star Wars, adding diversity and watching the strength of that, you know, improve so much, that that had been just neglected for such a long time. But man, with Bond, it's like the good and the bad just seem all centered around who his character is. Um, and so it's hard to keep that identity. Like I said, I don't know how I would rewrite it, um, how I would update it, because I just feel like we've passed the point where where who James Bond is, and what he is, are relevant to the modern era, for 100 reasons.
I think that's it. Honestly, that's it. We can hope that they do something what with it that's really well thought out, that actually acknowledges the imperialism. But again, what we've said repeatedly is it boils down to the writing. No matter who you cast, if the writing's not good, it is not going to work. Period. Full stop. So I guess good luck. May the odds be ever in your favor. And on that note, this is Belle, Pop Culture Uncovered. You can find us at PC Uncover on Twitter. No, not on Twitter. We're not on that site. Ugh. We're on Threads, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can find us at popcultureuncovered.com, where we have so many new pieces dropping, including a upcoming review of the new single from Doechii and Jenny of Blackpink, and our 28 days of Black cosplay. By the time this comes out, you may have already passed, but that's okay, because you can still go check out all of our cosplayers and so many wonderful things. And of course, if you want to support us, you can find us at Pop Culture Uncovered on Patreon. So give us your money.
Belle,
Yes.
why are we on Instagram when Instagram is literally run by like Dr. Evil's son?
We're not talking about that right now. Okay. And on that note, we love y'all. Peace. Dr. Evil's son, I'm about to hit you.
Mark Zuckerberg is